Everybody, welcome to Primers. We are here with Baranich, a country consultant and media analyst. Led, hello.
Hello.
This is B for Belarus, and today's program is dedicated to the theme social justice in Belarus, myths and reality. First of all, social justice is a very vague term, and Belarusian authorities claim that they rejected the free market economy and capitalism because they wanted our economy and our country be friendly to an ordinary person. So what's reality? What is the status of justice in Belarus, and how deep is the social justice ingrained in economic, financial, and social institutions of Belarus?
Belarusian authorities, they claim they are followers or they heirs, of the Soviet Union, which, was kind of socialism with social justice.
Human face.
The
economy with human face.
I haven't heard that they would call it with human face. It's actually in human face, because what we have in Belarus is actually contrary to the social justice system in Soviet Union. Well, the best example would be like this real estate privatization. In Soviet times, so those who don't know it, in Soviet times, people would stay in line to get an apartment.
10-15 years of waiting in a line.
It would be 5. In the regular state executive committees, it would be like about 12-15 years, really, yes.
But everybody was equal in terms of income. Even the party bosses did not drive Mercedes-Benz or Maybachs.
They had privileges.
They had Volgas and Zhigulis, and that's it.
Those were not their own. Those were provided with a chauffeur, which these Volgas and other, mostly Volgas, yes, and they would have them as bosses. Until they were bosses, they had daches, and they had good apartments. They had special privileges, special medical treatment. Well, nowadays these authorities we have now, they also have the same privileges. Special medical treatment, because although medical treatment here is medical services in general, healthcare is free, but for general population it is affordable, but not good, let's say.
All right, so let's start with the following. Lukashenko said that he rejected privatization. He kept all the assets in the hands of the government, of the people, as it were, because he wanted to prevent Belarus from turning into an oligarchy state. There is no oligarchy state in Belarus. Oligarchs are not around Lukashenko, because he himself turned into the most powerful person who unites.
He's like a king.
Unites economic, political powers, and of course full control over force structures. Well, what is better? We have a Russian oligarchy model, Ukrainian oligarchy model, and Belarus. So which model is most just, as it were?
I'm not sure about justice. In Belarus, we have maybe less evil with those oligarchs. In terms less evil, they can't uncontrollably obtain all resources privately. They're rich, they're even filthy rich, but they still have to pay their tribute to the boss. With Lukashenko, and he's the alpha and omega and all those things. It was like a joke. He wants to be bridegroom at every wedding, and dead man at that in the coffin at every funeral. So to be in the center and control everything, and
I think what is the thing is that comparing oligarchic model with the model where VIP in nomenclature keep control over all economic heights is a very difficult task, because both systems are unjust toward an ordinary person. The systems ruin opportunities for entrepreneurs, and no matter what you do, the basic function of the government, which is to provide justice and the rule of law, still is as bad in Belarus as it is in Ukraine or Russia.
In Belarus, it is aggravated by the fact that here authorities, especially authorities in regions, what is called rayon, and oblast, but even on smaller level, there are those like former bosses of collective farms, etc. Actually, they have something like a feudal system. People have no rights there, they're completely dependent on them, and this nepotism is everywhere, and that's corruption, not as we know it in terms of bribery, but in terms mostly of nepotism and clans.
The clans and people who were around Lukashenko still hold governing positions.
Personal approach, those who have personal approach to the body,
right?
They can get some privileges, and privileges they convert them into money and to some
tangible and intangible assets, as it were. All right. So, but at the same time, we can see that what Lukashenko claims to be his achievements in social policy. Pensions are paid in time, unlike in Ukraine or Russia, and pensions are like about 38% of the average wage in Belarus. Is it an achievement, or is it the situation when calling an average pension of $170 a good pension is a disgrace?
Well, we see some very strange picture here according to pensions, because the older generation of like my mother, who's 80 now, she gets pension about $250, $250, which is quite big.
So she's relatively well off.
Over 500 rubles, which in Belarusian rubles, of course, and it's quite high level of pension. But those pensioners who get pension in recent times, they have this 300, which is 150, something about that. And pensions are actually shrinking. They not only lowered they raised the age to go into the pension, but again now they imposed that thing, or rather introduced the new laws actually about pension, that if you don't have so-called social security payments for 20 years, you can't get pension until 65, and only that time you can get a social pension, which now is about $50, which is absolutely
below poverty level for Africa.
It is not. In the village, when you have natural, household,
you have to work hard till you die, otherwise you won't survive.
The other problem that you can't find jobs for that.
No jobs around.
People. Yeah. So I always say, and many times I've said that those who get those social pensions with $50 pension, they have to have option of euthanasia, because it would be more human. Well, how somebody can live on $50 a month? I mean, it's death by starvation and inhuman existence. I mean, so if somebody has, well, logically they have to have option end the miserable life with the dignity, I would say.
Yeah, in Belarus, the government preserved old state pay-as-you-go system where the government is the sole provider of pensions, and the government promised to keep the level of pensions at 40% of average wage, but it's very difficult to keep because we have about 3 million pensioners and a very shrinking workforce, which essentially the ratio of working population and pensioners would be like 1 to 1.4 in the coming 5 years, which makes the existing system of pensions absolutely unsustainable. That's why the government says we need more transfers from the budget to Social Security Fund, and again, that means that young people will never see pensions at all, or will have them on the level of $100 subsistence level. All right, that's one thing. What about social justice is associated with, many people associated with free education. How free is education in Belarus?
Again, this area is shrinking. We have free basic education, secondary education, like school, high school. That's right. And you can find free, it's free, but you have always to pay for something extra for for tutoring, for some other areas if you want to deeper knowledge, for teachers and for books. And but basically this education is free. But when you go to the university, the higher education, here's we have the budget, what is called budget students, and the commercial
people who young people who get the higher education paid by the government, and people who pay themselves. Essentially, the ratio of the former and the latter is like 75% of students pay for their higher education themselves. But how free is secondary or primary education? Because we see that in order to each year, we have so-called voluntary obligatory payments to the class or to school in order to provide different things to ensure
like repairments of classes,
proper functioning of the system.
Upgrading something like computers, etc. It's more, they call it voluntary sponsoring, right?
Yeah, voluntary sponsoring. At the same time, we do not have full control of parents, kids, some supervisors over how the money is spent. That's why the whole system looks for many people very suspicious. And when parents or kids think about going to the universities, they hire private tutors to prepare them for the exams.
You see, if we talk about here's interesting thing, when they hire tutors to get to the university on the free on a free basis, it's not good, because they find themselves in a slavery of mandatory work for 2 years, paying back to the state for their tuition, and if they don't, they have to pay even higher amount of money than those who pay for their own education. So those who have money, they probably would go to the commercial, let's say, option of education rather than budget for funding.
At the same time, you have state universities, and 75% of students pay for themselves.
Yes.
So there's a conflict of interest. You don't have separate budgets. Essentially, you cannot say how money is spent and say you have money from the budget and money that is paid by students. And it's difficult to understand how effective the expenditure process is, whether universities spend it correctly or not. In addition, all the curricular programs, mode of providing educational services is strictly controlled by Ministry of Education.
That's right.
Which is another, essentially we can call that, it's like big supervisory board for all private and state universities in the country.
Yes, it makes no sense. Like private universities or private colleges, whatever. like by their status of their like business, but they still can be free in what they teach, how they teach, etc. They have to follow those rules. That's another thing. Yes. So in these terms, but still, education is more or less affordable. But again,
it is affordable, but it's high. It's more expensive than in Poland, Lithuania, and
sure.
For example, if you know the German language, you can go and get education free, or like in Scandinavian language, you can
in Czech Republic, in Poland, those who there are many programs for students. So the quality is there, and again. In Belarusian higher education, except some cases, it is not accepted or recognized on the international level. So those who get Belarusian diploma of specialist, like physician, they can't just directly go to, say, Germany. They have to again to get some additional education on the local level, etc.
That's right. Otherwise, your diploma is worth nothing if it is a Belarusian diploma. While you have to go to Poland, and in Poland it's a EU standard education. Another aspect of social justice is illustrated in the labor situation, in the situation with hiring and firing practices, and one of the aspects of so-called social protection is illustrated by the number of people who are members of trade unions. In Belarus, we have almost everybody in workforce, official trade union. Federation of Trade Unions. Yes. How protected is a worker in the situation when the predominant employer is a government, and the government should follow its own social laws and standards in hiring and firing practices?
Here, again, we had recent amendments to this labor law, which makes labor force is more like slave labor force. Because
what makes you think so? Because please explain it.
The thing is that in past, like in Soviet times, even until like middle of after 2000 and just until maybe 2005. There was possibility for to have not a contract, but it's like open contract with just working indefinitely with no additional terms. You just write, for example, if you want to leave this job, you just write paper to your employer or saying you have to warn your employer like month ahead, and then you can leave that job. Now they forcefully introduced and actually made every business, nobody, it doesn't matter, state-owned, governmental bodies, everybody to have this contract, which can be 1 year, 2 years. On one side, there are such rules that employer can just use that contract to fire that employee for many reasons. Something he does not correspond to the job or something like that. But at the same time, the employee can't leave the job because there are many limitations to that, so he or she has to work until the end of the contract, although the contract can be bad. But now the the new amendment to that law, it stipulates that, for example, employer can send that employee to the other part of business which is not stipulated, or which is not, written the job
contract.
Obligations, and not in the contract. So we kind of so efficiently it's a serfdom, something like.
Well, essentially, what we know is that when an employer has a right to have 1 year contracts, it can fire anybody at any notice without any consequences.
It expires.
That's it. So that's the system that makes advantages to an employer. At the same time, employees, when there's kind of informal practice of ordering employers, governmental structures, not to fire workers without their previous notice. So they should have a permission from the executive council or the government to fire anybody or to optimize workforce. After that, they can have it. At the same time, when we see the structure of labor force, you see that the number of people employed in industry is shrinking, number of people employed in agriculture is shrinking, and number of people in the service sector is growing. But the service sector is also not that good place to work, because it varies from an IT person. That's one thing. In retail or wholesale, that's also very vulnerable. So we see the situation when for like 4 years in a row, the number of people who are fired exceeds the number of people who are hired by like 50,000 people. So essentially the reduction of workforce is another element, another illustration of the problems in this so-called social justice model in our country. If you are an employer of a governmental organization, how protected are you from the point of view, for example, if you have a maternity leave, a woman, right? You're a teacher and you have maternity leave, or you are on a sick leave, or can you work in a distance or distant employment? How flexible is the labor legislation in Belarus?
This maternity leave and sick leave, they still work, and I'm not sure in the numbers how much they paid for, but it is still
not
there.
Not much, but it's there.
It is still there, yes. Again, as for what was the third option?
The maternity leave lasts for 3 years. 2 years are paid by the government, and the third year is you can be on the maternity leave without any payment.
It was 3 years in past. Now,
yes, Bavarian. 3 years still, but 2 years are paid.
Yeah, but in the past I think they had 3 years paid.
Okay,
now
maybe.
They reduced it to 2 years. So apparently there is it's not good as was in past. And as for sick leave, it is still there, but there are many limitations, and sometimes those doctors, they don't like polyclinics where people go to get that document enabling that to. Again, there are many limitations. They try to get them to the work back, and
at the same time talking about social justice and protection in labor market, we should state that about 70% of workers in Belarus are paid less than $500.
It has deteriorated sufficiently as for people in advanced age. In past, it is still there in the law, but it is written that the handicapped person of first grade or the person who reaches 80 years, so they can have somebody who will take care of them. Like in past, for example, my mother is 80 years now, and she wanted to make such arrangement that somebody of relatives would be officially, taking care of her, and now they didn't.
Social care provided.
They didn't give that. They say social security workers say, well, you have to bring the document from the doctor, from the local polyclinica, that you need such care. But they say, well, since you move, you don't lie in the bed, you can't get that.
Oh,
and and they have instructions and nothing. In past, it was very easy. Somebody reaches 80 years, automatically gets that option to somebody. They can take somebody. Caretaker. It would be paid by the state about $150 $50, something like that, the salary.
But still, it's somebody who just can come up to an apartment to take care of the old person.
But it would not
does shopping, cleaning, laundering.
No, it's for 80 years now no longer available. Except these people are absolutely in condition. They can't move.
Not able to provide for themselves.
So that's sufficient deterioration of that security aspect.
All right. Well, another aspect of social security, social justice is healthcare. How efficient and how just is the healthcare system in Belarus, which is also based on the constitutional statement, is free and should be provided to everybody?
You know, it still works. More or less, I have those cases when I needed some, surgical treatment or even MRA and other things. They provide it. You have to, for example, although you have to go to the eye doctor, for example, to line for even month or that ear otholorhynchist, you have to again to stay in line to for like 2 weeks maybe, but still affordable and it is free. And if some serious operation is needed, they do it absolutely free.
Something really that strikes me: many foreigners say come up here to do dentists, to meet dentists, to take care of different aspects of their health. Even diagnosis is okay because sometimes we have very good equipment to provide such health medical services. At the same time, we see the situation of growing deficit of medical doctors, nurses, people that can work in this area.
Yes.
Because they are hugely underpaid. If you compare wage level in neighboring EU countries, that's like 3-4 times higher there than in Belarus. And many people in Belarus, even they go to Russia to provide services and come back because they're paid more there. So how vulnerable the Medicare system in Belarus with this kind of payment policy or income policy?
Here is one very important thing which they made a law which does not allow medical workers like doctors and nurses who do not have what is called first grade, something they have grades, first and higher grade. Those who don't have this first or high grade, they can't work in private clinics. Which and to get that grade, you have to work 7 years at the state clinic.
But no more. That's the recent amendment to the licensing law abolished this norm that obliged private clinics to hire, to have a certain quota and certain share of people with highest and first degree access to medical services. So that's liberalized.
At least my son, he's dentist. When he graduated from the university, which was not which was paid by by me, actually. It was not paid by state. And he's good dentist, actually. He was practicing when he was at third grade and third year of his tuition at the university. And but he couldn't work. He could work for the clinic. They would allow him to work. I mean, he was a good specialist, but he had to leave to Moscow.
The amendment was adopted like 2-3 days ago. So that's the most recent amendment that definitely liberalized the medical service market.
Well, but it won't work with him, or maybe it will work, but he's now in the selling business, of selling the dentistry equipment, so it's much more money, less trouble there. So maybe this amendment will really work, because it was really evil, because a lot of good specialists, they would leave to the Russia, to the Russian clinics and to Russia and to even to other countries. So maybe it
So
will
you are not that critical of the status of healthcare system in Belarus, though it is in state hand and the government has failed to deliver anything on the healthcare reform.
Those times I would visit, I would have problems with health, although I have, fortunately, have good health. I take care of my health. But I would get all necessary treatment and absolutely free. Except some rare, blood samples, maybe in some special, but even MRI was free of charge, which, I remember like 10 years ago I had to look for some shadow way to get doctor and was paying money for that. You still have option of services for money, which will be faster. But the quality will be the same, and those private clinics...
You just don't waste time waiting in lines.
Well, it's more comfortable. For example, you get your own room at the hospital, being treated, better medical treatment. I mean, you can get some imported medicine instead of local ones. But they still... I would say that the Medicare is really still good. I mean, like in comparison, let's say in the United States you have to pay huge amounts for this for insurance.
And you have
friends of mine. They would come here for dentistry, for example, which is much cheaper and of very good quality.
Exactly.
Although free dentistry here is troublesome.
As anything is free is definitely of lower quality.
No. Quality is fine. Quality,
if you dentist service in a state polyclinic, they use not as good materials as.
My son told me that they use good quality. Everything's fine. The problem that you can't get, for example, if you want your tooth cured, you have to stay in line for 2 or 3 months. But I asked him, he said they have modern equipment, modern materials, everything, good doctors. No, I asked him about it.
All right. Finally, talking about social justice, we cannot avoid talking about the justice system, court system, rule of law, institutions that should provide for protecting interests and rights of an individual in court if he or she has any disputes with other citizens or with the government. How well functioning is it? Essentially, property rights, human rights and freedoms. How strong is the system to provide for that?
Well, if we take this first option, citizen versus citizen, it will be more or less fair. Courts would work with that. They would consider different options between. The case would be, I think, would be fair. But if you talk about human rights, like it would be like citizen versus the government
versus business, state company
or business. Here is quite gloomy picture because Belarus, according to our laws, international laws are not mandatory in Belarus, and so if you apply to, for example, some agreement, international agreement which Belarus signed, it means nothing because according to our laws, legally our local laws, like the constitution, the presidential decrees and orders, they're above international treatments, international laws. So here's the problem, because apparently in this system of authoritarian power, of course, government will be on the first place in courts, and of course, state will accept rare cases. State always wins, and state-owned enterprises always win, and those who close to the government, even private enterprises, they will always win. And that
predominantly decisions by courts are made in favor of government institutions, state-owned enterprises, and that's why if this is the fundamental function of the government. If it does not provide for protection of property rights and human rights, then no matter how much you get from social perks and subsidies, this is a fundamental flaw in the system of social justice.
There is like an unwritten rule that state or the government can't be wrong.
Yep.
It's like somebody would be imprisoned for wrong case. They would always look for some case against that person to vindicate he or she was imprisoned for that.
To say nothing about the participation in political campaigns and ensuring the right to vote, to be elected and to elect, which does not exist in Belarus.
Yes.
In fact, so summing up, how sustainable is the social justice system in Belarus?
I would say it is not very sustainable. It's under great pressure and a great social tension now. And I don't know how it will end up with that. But people are really unprotected, except those very lucky old people who got their pensions, like my mother. She's 80 now. They have fair pensions and etc. But the younger generation is very vulnerable, and
that's why so many young people are eager to leave.
Of course,
some of them don't want to serve in the army. Others find the educational system unfit for the labor market in the future, and that's why they don't have a chance to essentially express their ideas, creativity within state-owned enterprises which dominate the economy. So essentially, it has some limited sustainability, but in the long run, definitely it is doomed.
I don't know how it is doomed, but it is dissolving. It is kind of going to. There is high social tension, and of course, for young people, great desire to leave this country. That's rule number one. Probably the exception. Even those who are loyal to the government, they still, if they would have option, they would leave this country.
Right. So that was our input on the topic social justice in Belarus, myths and reality. What would you call the biggest myths about Belarusian social justice system, especially in Ukraine and Russia? Because every time I talk to Ukrainians and Russian colleagues and friends, they say, "Oh gosh, your system is much better, is fairer, ordinary people are protected." What can you tell them?
Well, they're brainwashed, actually, there. They believe propaganda, and I would tell them, for Russians, I would tell they have better situation in many areas than we here. To Ukrainians, they have more freedom, and I don't know how, actually, I'm not very much familiar with the situation of this everyday level for ordinary citizens, but they certainly have more freedom, but again they have more options for oligarchs of this shadow bribery, etc. But they see Belarus through the eyes of propagandists on Belarusian state TV, and maybe some mythology being spread by some people going there, but that's yes, in this case, well, the only option is to tell them the real situation, how it looks like well, maybe except only one thing, with Ukrainians, maybe except of our healthcare system, because their healthcare system, I heard terrible stories by them. But in Russia, it's okay. They have. Well,
it's not that much okay. Come on, it varies.
No, maybe in Moscow, but in
Moscow
regions,
is one thing.
it's terrible. Yes, in Moscow, it's terrible. Yes, but in our regions, it's also not good. I mean, like everywhere, Minsk is fine, but if you go to the village to get to the doctor, it's a big problem.
So, Vlad, we still have good PR about social justice, social security system. That's why our president still has very good, high reputation in Ukraine and Russia, because he is perceived by many people as somebody who does not steal, who did not create oligarchs, who keeps control over the justice system and the court system. And these are the elements of the social justice system Russians and Ukrainians would like to have.
Again, they exploit a lot of mythology about that.
Yep.
The propaganda works, and for example, if they take a good clinic here, for example, good hospital in Minsk, they show it to Ukrainians somewhere in the region, in a poor region. Of course, they say, "Oh, it's cool there." They call our president the father. It's like the chieftain.
You're right.
Like in
chief.
The chief.
An Indian tribe.
Yes, chief of Indian tribes. Something, or it was this word, the father.
Batka.
Batka is the Belarusian for
right.
the father. There were gangs of anarchists during the Civil War, so those who were in charge of the gangs, they were called that, the father, Batka.
Right. Well, you see that social justice in Belarus is not as well represented as in European countries and the United States, but we definitely can say that it is better in very many elements than Ukraine and Russia. At the same time, it is facing very big challenges. First of all, sustainability will be eroded by the changing Russian energy policy, and of course falling competitiveness of Belarusian state enterprises. So if the government does not undertake serious measures to reform economy, to reform the provision or the provision of so-called social services, then in the near 10 years the quality would definitely deteriorate, and many more people would go abroad, either with the purpose
it will collapse, I think, if nothing is changed.
Of working there or living there, which is again a very big challenge to the Belarusian social system in general. Demography, which is getting worse and worse, and the average wage of women in the rural area is about 50 years old, and there's no sight of young people moving to a rural area. So the urbanization is that about 80% of Belarusians live in cities, and the concentration of population in regional cities in Minsk is so big that probably if it goes along like this...
Yes, Minsk is growing at the cost of regions. People are just massively coming here, and sometimes they just travel like 100 kilometers from from the cities
to work here, right?
Yes.
All right, so thank you, Vlad, for your input into this topic. You see, friend, that Belarus is not that like black and white situation. It has very many shades and aspects of social justice, social security situations. So in order to understand it, you shouldn't just be like this, either the opposition view, everything is bad and rotten and it is collapsing, or the official view, everything is fine and we are getting better. We are better off than any Western country. So come up here. It's friendly. It's clean. At the same time, it's too much standardized, and it's too much Soviet-style social justice with the huge prevailing element of the Leviathan, which dominates so many aspects that young people, especially, don't want to deal with that and leave. That was the program Be for Belarus. Stay with us. Be with us. We will provide you with an in-depth analysis as insiders what is going on in our country to unwrap this mystery which many people call Belarus. As we know it for sure, we are not blackmailing it, we are not putting dirt on it, we are just trying to expand your understanding of our beautiful country.
Yes, stay tuned, listen to us, and you will be aware of what's going on.
Right, cheerio, so long, bye.
Goodbye.